and good morning, everybody. And just to say how important this document is, Minister, and how delighted we are to be here to launch it with you and the department. I'm going to be a little more formal than I would ordinarily be, because this is a very important document and there are some important just messages that we need to communicate. People are increasingly aware of the crucial role played by the community and voluntary sector in Ireland today. You know, the impressive facts are fairly well known thanks to the work of the charity regulator and Benefax, but just it's useful to bring them into our minds again. 35,000 community and voluntary organisations, 86,000 volunteer directors and trustees, 165,000 people employed, over 14 billion turnover. Half of that raised by the sector itself, half of it coming from the state in various forms, grants, service agreements, contracts. So there's a real partnership here. So the sector is massive in every respect, and it's present across the country in many forms. It's present in our tens of thousands, as Mary indicated, local, voluntary and community groups, most of them employing no staff and often taken for granted, and focusing on a multiplicity of areas, from environmental action to community development, and forming the fabric of our local communities. And their presence really did come to the fore during the COVID crisis, when their work to reach out to older and more vulnerable groups through community call was crucial to keep our communities safe. The sector is also present in our activist communities, working and advocating for a world free of poverty and social and economic exclusion and disadvantage, and indeed for a world free of prejudice and discrimination in all its forms. There is much that remains to be done if the vision of a fair and inclusive Ireland that underpins the values and principles we're championing today is to be realised. The sector is also present in the thousands of organisations, and I'm glad to see some of them represented here, and also the agencies that fund them here too, in the thousands of organisations that provide essential services and supports through our hybrid public services system. This includes organisations supporting people with disabilities, older people, children, young people and families, and people of working age. Startlingly, 1 in 3 people delivering public services in Ireland today works for a charity, community group or a social enterprise. That is a mind-boggling number, and it hasn't sunken into the policy system sufficiently yet. That's the reality of it. That's the extent of the hybridisation of public services in Ireland today. So it's also important that we note that these values and principles developed by the sector in partnership with government are intended to provide a foundation for consultation, collaboration and partnership working between the sector and central and local government. The essential role played by our community and voluntary sector across all these facets of national life means that this very diverse sector works in close partnership with the state. The sector collaborates with departments like rural and community development, education, justice, social protection and environment, and also with agencies like the HSE, TUSLA and POLO, both here today, and the education and training boards. I cannot emphasise enough the intertwined nature of the way the sector and the state collaborate in supporting communities and people in Ireland. In fact, the way that we do or don't support people and communities, and how we do or don't engage respectfully with people and communities, is what makes it so important for us to identify and live the values and principles we are considering this morning. In the final analysis, community and voluntary organisations and statutory departments and agencies both work for public benefit. They're not for profit. I believe this fact, this crucial fact, shows the similarity in the nature of community and voluntary organisations and their statutory counterparts. They're both expressions of our human need and desire to provide for ourselves collectively and inclusively, and to do that with care and fairness and inclusion. And this closeness in both spirit and work is what I think makes the values and principles for collaboration and partnership working so important. Now, while all of this is positive, I have to note, I have to be honest, that there are unfortunately many places where the relationship is strained and under stress. I need to communicate that from the membership of the Wheel. This is something that we need to say. And where it is felt, and I'm going to use a strong word now, where it is felt that lip service is sometimes paid to the crucial values and principles identified today. And that's what we need to make sure it doesn't happen. Okay? So how are we going to do that? The state holds a great deal of power in the relationship because of its control over much of the resources allocated to the sector. And remember, this is work that in many cases involves the delivery of what would be regarded by the public, if they were asked, as essential services that happen to be delivered by community and voluntary organisations. There are important positive processes underway. Some of the representatives are in the room here today, such as the Health Dialogue Forum between the Department of Health and the HSE and the CD sector. That's a partnership process in train. Such as TUSLA's work to commission services in partnership with the sector, another process in train, where these principles need to be applied and lived and adapted. Okay. Which brings me to my main point. While it is great that we have a document today that reflects the fruit of collaborative work, and this is emphasised in Rachel's point, between the sector and the CD sector, we need now to see an ongoing and sustained and resourced effort to achieve the culture change that's needed at all levels of public service and in all places and spaces in the CD sector too. So this isn't just about reforming the way public services are done, it's about the sector looking at itself as well in relation to understanding how inclusive it in fact is. We greatly welcome and note the Minister's intent to champion these values and principles and to work with public sector colleagues to realise their intent. We would encourage a very proactive and ambitious approach to achieve the culture change necessary if these principles are to change the way we do things around here. And that's what changing culture is about. For that is what is needed if a partnership approach is to genuinely thrive. I have a few final points to make and then I'm finishing. This is just the start, of a process. Just the start. It's just a document, that's it. It needs to, yes it does, it is emergent, it comes out of places where these values live in the sector and in the system and in public services. And those pathfinders need to become the norm, so we need to put in place a process. So in furtherance of this, we believe we need to see a programme of awareness raising within the public service and across all relevant departments and agencies to promote these values. We need formal acknowledgement of the principles and values by all relevant departmental and agency management teams and the incorporation of these principles into their practice. We need to see reviews of engagement and funding processes and procedures and funding agreements to bring them into line with the spirit of these values and principles. Too often we see legalistic and adversarial and conditional small print that takes precedence and often unhelpfully sets the tone in relationships between funders and the organisations they fund. And finally, we need to see real case studies of what the application of these principles and values would actually look like in practice, and does look like in practice, real case studies. And we need processes to roll out the application of these principles, and those processes should model the way forward for departments and agencies. And in conclusion, and very importantly, we in the community and voluntary sector must look too at our own practice at both organisation and sectoral levels and ask whether the approach our organisations take is in fact inclusive, does it respect diversity, does it harmonise with efforts already underway, do we genuinely value subsidiarity in our own organisations in the way we work in terms of de-hierarchalising and all the rest of it, and most importantly, do we actually provide and offer value for money? So the sector itself will need to look closely at these values and principles and achieve a similar focus on ensuring these principles change culture in the community and voluntary sector for the better. And to echo finally Rachel's point, all of that will need resourcing. So the resourcing question is always there. So thank you very much.